Back on News at Prime, Justice Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi says work is underway to ensure that institutional independence and unification of a single judiciary gets in place. This means that the Justice Department will be transferring some of its functions to the Office of the Chief Justice. Kubayi says a task team appointed to work on this is making significant progress. She held a conversation with Judges Matters on judicial reform earlier today.
So since the formation of the task team, the work on the transition to administrative and operational independence of the judiciary, significant progress have been made to make this vision a reality. It has been agreed between the department and the OCJ that the transfer of functions from the department to OCJ should be done in phases. Phase 1 will involve the immediate transfer of shared services relating to the superior courts from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development to OCJ. These shared services are not provided for in any legislative instrument, and the transfer could be effective through a directive from the minister to the accounting officers of the department and OCJ. And that would mean that the Minister of Finance would not put those will not put that budget in the Department of Justice, but it will go directly. And with this mechanism, it's easy to do, and that's why we've termed it the phased one approach, and the phased approach and phase 1 implementation. And this, we're looking at implementing it from the 1st of April.
Meanwhile, Kubayi says she'll be meeting with the police ministry to discuss efforts to enhance security at courts. This follows a spate of violent attacks near courtrooms.
Next week, we've agreed between ourselves and Minister of Police to have a bilateral meeting between the two departments so that we can be able to look at how do we collaborate, how do we support each other. And Minister of Police has said that he had committed to the communities in Western Cape that he will come back so that we can be able to say this is how we are intervening. So we are looking at that. It's something that we are worried about. The security in the courts. In many areas, we have been able to review our security measures. You'd understand that because there were not much incidents, so you'd have at a particular level of security. Now, with what we are seeing, we had to review our implementation of security, not only in terms of structures, but even protection. Protection of magistrates, protection of judges, protection of prosecutors, security at courts, including cameras, including the scanners, making sure that the scanners are working. So it's those things that we had to look at.
Now, for more on this and what government can do to ensure prosecutors' safety, I'm joined now by Dr. Jean Redpath, Senior Researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape. Doc, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. The heinous crime of the brutal killing of prosecutors, how is this affecting the system? Do legal professionals themselves still have the impetus and the energy to pursue cases and pursue justice? But as far as the public is concerned, do they still trust in the institutions and those working in the institution that they're doing their best?
Yes, I think we as a country are in something of a crisis point with our criminal justice system. And the murder of the particular prosecutor that was referenced, Tracy Brown in particular, is deeply concerning. However, we have to also have some perspective and realize that the 5 prosecutors that were killed over 5 years actually equates to the murder rate of South Africa. So this is the threat that all South Africans face. We would actually have expected 6 to have been killed over the last 5 years if the murder rate that applies to South Africans generally would apply to prosecutors. However, when prosecutors are targeted because of their work or because of their approach in a particular case, this is of extreme importance. And the most important thing is to identify the perpetrators and to arrest and convict and put them away. That is what the system needs to do as a matter of urgency, to respond with urgency to those kinds of murders. And unfortunately, we're not seeing our criminal justice system respond with urgency, even though police and prosecutors and magistrates themselves are starting to feel under threat. So the best way to deal with this is to respond quickly and appropriately as soon as possible.
Is that threat, in your view, heightened by the fact that more and more South Africans would like to not only hear of justice being done, but would like to see justice being done, and hence you see a lot of media houses applying to be in courtrooms, in some instances not concealing the identities of prosecutors?
So I think this whole idea of concealing the identity of prosecutors is something of a red herring. I think, you know, an accused in a case is always going to know who the prosecutor is. It's always going to be able to find out. If someone wants to take a prosecutor out, it's going to be possible. We need transparent justice. We need open courtrooms. What is a huge risk is if less and less is in the public domain and we can't see what's going on as a nation. We need to see what's going on. We need to know what happens in court. And in fact, I would argue for far more coverage of what's happening, because when you start to look at the data, you see that in some areas of the country, as opposed to others, we're seeing not the kind of prosecutions that we would like to see. And the more that is exposed and the more that is in the public domain, the more pressure there is to address that. We absolutely need to deal with the issue of security in and around the courts. We need to have secure zones around the courts. It's not just prosecutors who are under threat, it's witnesses. It's even in some instances, accused persons themselves have been taken out. And so we really need a safe zone around our courts. The time when people are most at risk is when they are leaving the court building, and everybody has to come in and out the court building at some point. And so particular attention needs to be paid to that area immediately around the court building. One of the murders that took place in Wynberg was actually inside the court building. Somehow the perpetrator managed to get a weapon inside, so that should never have happened if security was working properly. However, we've now seen incidents also happen around the court building. And so we really need to pay attention to a safe zone outside court buildings, and to be aware that that is a particular vulnerable zone that needs protection.
Now, the National Prosecuting Authority is saying they've got protection measures, including a close protection policy where they are protected when there is a threat. How well is that particular policy being implemented?
So I think the weakness of that policy is that it applies when there is a threat. So if someone hasn't actually received a threat, a direct threat, they're not going to have. So we need to have a basic level of protection in and around the courts for everyone, not just prosecutors, that applies whether or not someone has received a threat. When someone has received a threat, there needs to be an escalated situation, and that seems to be working relatively well. We know also that the witness protection program works well when witnesses are in it. The problem is that before you become a witness in a case, you don't receive witness protection. And if you decide to step off the program, you don't receive witness protection if you don't want to give up your whole identity, et cetera, et cetera. So the program works when people are in it. It doesn't work in the whistleblowing stage before you are in. The protection doesn't apply until you are in the court phase. And we really need to look at amending the legislation to ensure that witness protection is available also to people who are not yet testifying in court and who may be under threat. And that is where the hole is in the protection, particularly of witnesses.
Now, of Cape Town, Jordan Hill-Lewis is calling for cell phone signal blocking technology to be implemented in prison, calling at least for a pilot at this particular point at the Pollsmoor prison, because he's warning that some of these hits are actually being instituted from inmates inside prison.
Yes, so we know from some of the raids that have happened in correctional services that prisoners are able to get in a great deal of contraband, not just cell phones, but drugs and other things inside the prison. The problem with cell phone blocking is that will it apply to everybody, so not just the prisoners. And perhaps what needs to be thought through is perhaps a way of allowing people to have communication, but having it monitored and controlled. Yeah, it's a different way of looking at the problem. Overall, kind of blocking affects everybody. Do we really think that no one should be able to communicate from inside prison? Maybe some kind of monitored communication would be a way of getting around the problem, and then ensuring that unmonitored devices are not available inside.
Dr. Jean, I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. Dr. Jean Redpath, Senior Researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape.